Okay, we're picking up now. It's still June 19th, 2007, but now we're going to talk to Sandy Patarini. Sandra.
We're going back in time.
Sandra Stang Patarini.
Sandra Florence Nancy.
Okay. I stand corrected.
Nancy Stang Patarini.
And where were you born?
South Shore Hospital on the south side of Chicago on November 1st, 1937. And I don't remember what time it was. Later in the day, because I began my life sleeping late, which I love to do the rest of my life. Okay?
That's where myself and your grandson get it from. Okay. And the same like I asked Dad. Describe your family. You had a sibling, and your parents. What? Just go ahead and describe.
Okay, I was a Depression baby, which surprises were called at the end of the Depression. And my parents, my father was 11 years older than my mother. He was 46 when I was born. My mother was 35, and I was a definite surprise. My father's mother died when he was 12 of childbirth, during childbirth. And he never wanted a woman to have to suffer like that, his wife. And so they had Lois and
your sister,
my older sister, in 1923. They were married in 1923, and Lois was born in the fall. They were married January 3rd. And my mother used to have a fit when I would say, I was born on the 1st, my sister was born on the 2nd, and my parents were married on the 3rd. And different months, of course, but in different years. But my mother would get so embarrassed. Oh, don't say that, you know. But anyway, Lois was 14 when I was born, and Lois was a tomboy, and dark hair, brown eyes, freckles, full of it, and I was the blonde, fair-skinned...
Shirley Temple look-alike.
Well... even cuter, apparently, and...
We've got the photos to prove it.
And, well, see, in those days, you didn't have cameras that you took pictures at home. The families, both mother and dad's families, you went to photographic studios and had pictures taken. And so that, after the Depression, they had more money, they could do that, you know. So, anyway.
Big deal.
It was a big deal. And...
So your father was Herman?
My father was Herman William Stang. He was a plasterer. His mother passed away when he was 12.
Where did he grow up? He didn't grow up in the city?
He grew up on the east side, where I was born. My father was born in the house at 107, I was going to say 25, but that's the Mekong. 107th and Mackinac Avenue on the east side, and he was born at home. He was the third in a line of 5 children: Henry, Paul, Herman, Martha, and Louise. And apparently there were 2 Louises. One passed away as an infant, and then his youngest sister that his mother died in childbirth with. And mother was born in West Salem, Wisconsin. She was the oldest of 2 girls, Lillian, which later Lois couldn't say Lil, so she calls her Sis, and Aunt Sis was the name Lillian Weirs had the rest of her life with our family. And mother was the daughter of Minnie Brandt and Charles Novak, and Charles was not well liked by the rest of Minnie's family because he played the horses, and that didn't go down in their German family, and the family became very active in seeing that that marriage didn't continue long. Aunt Sis was, I think, 7 years younger than Mother, And anyway, so it was Florence, Jenny, Novak sang, and they were married January 3rd, 1923. Lois was born September 2nd, 1923, and I was born November 1st, 1937. Lois and I were both born in Chicago. Mother and Dad moved there hours after they got married. They had a chivalry on the farm, which is an old-time hazing of the bride and groom by the neighbor and everything. And they chivalried them to the train. They got on the train. They got off in Chicago and rented apartments for a few years, then another, and then bought a house. And that house was their home until 1986 when we sold it.
Now, the Novaks and the Brandts and your ancestors, they were of German, and there was some Dutch in there too, wasn't there, or was it all German?
Yeah. German and Dutch are interchangeable in the German language. Okay. German men were called Dutch. Papa sang was called Dutch. Stuff like that. It's no.
But they had been in the States a few generations, or
no. Dad was first generation American.
Okay.
And I'm not positive, and I'm not sure if I can get the records to find out whether Mother's mother and her siblings were born in the United States or not. So they may have been, or they may not have been. Mother may have been first, possibly second generation.
Okay.
And since her parents were divorced early, they were, Sis and Lois and Mother were kind of the black sheep, although there weren't a lot of children in the family. But because Grandma was divorced in before 1910, this was quite a thing. And she ran...
Small town, Wisconsin.
Yeah, and she ran a restaurant, and she lived on the farms with, her father and the uncles, and took care of them and did the cooking. And
so how did your parents meet? Was Grandpa working a job in Wisconsin, or?
Oh, no, his family also. He had his mother, Louise Stang, Lindenberg, Louise Lindenberg, and her brother, Herman Lindenberg. There were two children. And their father was a shipbuilder in Chicago on the east side, and so was my father's father. Okay? So the two fathers became acquainted. Okay? And Dad's father met Louise and thought she was just it. And we're talking back in the 1800s. And because Dad was born in 1891. And so they were shipbuilders. We have pictures of ships they worked on from the Chicago World Fairs and stuff like that. And Herman Lindenberg moved to Wisconsin where his parents were. And he met a woman and married and had a number of children up there. And Dad's mother, Louise, the only sister of Herman Lindenberg, died with her fifth child in childbirth. And so in the summers, the children would go to Wisconsin to visit and stay with their cousins on the farm. Okay? And so that was the second home of my father. And so when he started plastering at 18, he would still go and be a hired hand up in Wisconsin. And one of the Lindenbergs had a house in West Salem where the Brandts were. And that's how as high as...
That's why I thought he had grown up in Wisconsin on the farm, because he was summered there. Okay.
And my mother did not have a father, and my father, Herman Stang, did summer hired hand work there, and she always thought he would be a wonderful person for my grandmother to marry. So my mother, Florence, was trying to fix her mother, Minnie, up with who turned out to be my father, Herman.
Because there was, what would you say, 11 years between them?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well,
and 13 between Dad's parents, the two of them. And that's why, and 14 years between his youngest sister and 14 years between us. We were destined to find each other. Anyway, Dad would go out on Saturday nights and to the bar and win candy bars at throwing darts, bring the candy home to the house, put the candy on the stairs, so that in the morning, only on Sundays, were the children allowed to come down the front room stairs, not the back kitchen stairway, and the candy would be waiting there for Mother. And she thought he'd be a great father. Little did she know, it turned out to be her husband.
And how old was she when they got married? You might have said it already.
Mother was 20 when she got married. Lois was 19, and I was 21.
Okay. So, and I guess, I already asked Dad about any memories of the Depression or World War II, or do you remember rationing or things like that?
Yeah, I remember rationing because I was sick.
Okay.
I was a very sickly child, and therefore the golden-haired child was also the sickly child, and I would go to the doctor, and he would give me extra ration tokens to get the different foods that I needed for my condition. I had been told...
Delicate constitution.
I was told that I had rheumatic heart. And that's why when Harry Robert was born in Oregon, Mother and I, the doctor suggested it would be a good time for me to leave Chicago in the winter and go to California for the bad weather because I was so sick. But yeah, that was the rationing. I remember the coupons. I remember the war stamps. You remember the war stamps?
Savings stamps.
You'd buy them in school and you'd save them in a book like St. H. Green stamps. And then you'd buy a bond. And you did this through school and the post office.
Yep. War bonds.
And anyway, okay, so that I remember from the war. I remember Lois's husband, Harry, was, they were married young. And she was 19 and he was 22. And they got married in Texas, and then she became pregnant immediately with Harry Robert Butch and moved to Oregon and lived with, Pauline Howard. And Pauline's husband was in the service, but they owned a house. And they rented the room to Lois, and Mother and I went out there when Lois had her baby and stayed, for the month and whatever. And so I, remember those war years. And then Lois and Butch came home when Harry was sent off, I don't know, to the Philippines or where he went, South Pacific. And Lois stayed at home in our house for a long time. That's when, Lois and Mother and the baby were in the front bedroom, and Dad and I were in the back bedroom. And Lois moved her office from Swift & Company, or Armour, to our front hallway. You walked in the front door, and there's a little room, and that was her office. And I remember when FDR died, I knew it was very important, and I sat in that little room, and Lois wasn't there. The radio that you have that we gave you was in that room with the pedestal table with the old radio in it. And I remember sitting there on the floor alone crying when I heard the president died, and I didn't know too much what it was, but I knew it was important. And I sat there crying as this little blonde kid with curls and just...
Oh, 6, 7 years old at the time, probably, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. Do you know when FDR died? What year?
45.
43. 42, because Truman was president toward the end of the Second World War.
I'm pretty sure the Yalta Conference was in, like, the beginning of 45. It was... Truman took over right before he dropped the bomb. He had only been in office 2 months before he dropped the bomb, I'm pretty sure. It was spring of 45, I'm pretty sure, but, you know, putting it on tape now, we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, because that would make me 7 or 8.
Is not my strong suit.
I just remember that it was right. He almost saw the war to an end. It was kind of like Lincoln. He very close saw the war to an end, but did not see it end. And then Truman took over and had to make the big decision of whether to invade Japan or drop the bomb. But all right.
But that I remember, and the rationing and the air raids. Don't you remember the air raids? My dad was an air raid captain during the
Air raid warden.
Air raid warden. Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure there wasn't any light seeping out so the Nazis could...
That's what they did. But my dad, during the war years, worked as a watchman in the chemical plant on the 115th, 116th, and Lois worked there in the office for a while, and that's how I got my first dog. My dad was the watchman, and Lois worked days. He was the night watchman. And there was this poor stray dog, brown, long-haired dog with a curly tail, and Lois felt so sorry for him that she talked Dad into saving this dog and bringing him home. And when I was born, we had a dog, Pal, that had been Lois's dog and Mother and Dad's, and Pal couldn't handle me as a new interloper in the home. And he just mourned himself to death. He just whined away and died. And so then I got Brownie, and Brownie was my first dog. And he was all burned with the chemicals on his legs and everything. And again, Mother had to nurse him back. She nursed Jiggs back, too, from when we first got him, but that was a later story. But Dad was a air raid warden, and you'd hear these whistles blowing in the neighborhood, and it'd be a summer night, and you'd be out playing. You know, at that age, I wasn't playing too far down the street, but you'd be playing. You'd have to get home quick and pull down all the blinds in the house, and pretend and get off all the lights and pretend that there was nothing. Well, not pretend. You had to make sure there was no lights coming through to the outside, and pretend that something horrible was going to happen, that there was a plane overhead. And the meat and the butter rationing, the sugar rationing.
Silk stockings.
That was later. That was during the war. Lois and Mother were always so wanting nylon stockings, and I sold Christmas cards to make money to buy Christmas presents. I sold them door to door from the time I was 8 or 9 or 10. And I went down to South Chicago with my mother, apparently. I couldn't do the bus alone at that age. And went in Woolworth's dime store, and I hit it when there were nylons for sale that they had just gotten a shipment in. And I was so young, I didn't know that there were sizes. And so I bought these nylons as this wonderful Christmas present for Lois. And they, of course, were the wrong size, and she had to pretend it was important and everything like that. But the war affected us a lot. The thing, when Lois came back from Oregon to Chicago, Harry was off, and in some pretty rough battles, apparently. And she would never know if he was living or dead. And she would be, snippy with my mother, and my mother would say, look, he's going to be okay. He's gonna be. And then the letters would come in the mail. We used to get 2 mail deliveries every day, except at Christmas when you might get 3 or 4, and right to your house. And she got the letter from him, that all was well, and he was saved. He was not among the ones that got killed, and it was not nice seeing Lois suffer. And I have no compassion for anybody from the Japanese war years because of what I saw Lois go through. And yet she and Harry lived through it as adults and were separated in their marriage, and they went to Japan. But as this little kid, 5 or 6, it made such an impression on me. I just could never understand how they could forgive and forget what they went through, but I was seeing it from the kid's eyes.
Now, you helped raise HR, or Butch as you call them, while Lois was off working, because she would have, been adult and Harry was off to war, so you were pretty much the babysitter in charge of Butch?
Well, in charge of all her kids. Lois was 14 years older than me. When I was 5, she was 19 and married. When she was 20, she had HR, and I was an aunt. And then they came home, and there was only 6 years between Harry, Robert, and me, and then there was 5 years between HR and Betty and Bill, 5 years each. So in the 10 years, she had the 3 kids. And Lois would take 1 year off with each kid from work. And other than that, I babysat and watched her kids and disciplined them and taught them and peeled potatoes and ironed Harry's undershorts and everything else on the what were they called, Pat?
Mangles.
On the mangles. They were a thing, a roller ironer that you operated with your knee and the top came down, or I would iron by hand and peel the potatoes and have everything ready every night when Lois got in from work so she could continue. And it's funny, their apartment on Ewing Avenue above the coffins, was exactly the same layout as your mother is what you said. It was the living room with the bedroom off. You came up the stairs into the dining room. Mm-hmm. Harry and Lois's bedroom was off of that. Down the hall, the bathroom was there. You got to the kitchen and a bedroom off of that, and they had a porch, a closed-in porch, and you went down the stairs. But that was their second place on the east side. But my summers, when I was growing up, my mother, during the war years, to earn money, during the Depression, she made and sold baked goods door to door to buy clothes for Lois. And then every summer we went to West Salem so that she would be with her mother's children, because Grandma died when Lois was little. Grandma Novak Minnie died when she, in 1920. 29. And so we would go back there, and we would move in with Aunt Sis, and Ronnie would go up to the bedroom, but that Ronnie was Aunt Sis's only child, and he was 6 or 7 years older than me, and he was like a big brother to me, and loved him dearly, and he also liked comic books, and I got a comic book every time I walked to the 106th and Ewing Avenue with my dad so that he could get his racing form. I would get a comic, or maybe I could talk him into 2 10-cent comics. But Ronnie had his comics, and we would go there, and Mother worked at the pea plant. And people didn't even realize, Lois didn't know Mother had her Social Security number because she had always been a stay-at-home mom, a traditional mother, but Mother worked in the pea plant. And I would play with kids next door. Aunt Sis worked at Sears and LaCrosse. Ronnie worked on the tobacco farms. Uncle Ed was an electrician or worked in the wheat, what was it called? The grain mills.
Yeah.
He had his own grain company.
Uncle Ed and Aunt Sis came to Chicago and lived with you guys while Uncle Ed went to school to become an electrician.
Yeah, but he also owned the grain elevator, what you call later. But yes, they lived in Chicago in the 2-bedroom house when Lois was little, so that Uncle Ed could get his electrical credentials. Yeah. And then Mother and I would go back in the summers and spend summers there, kind of reciprocity. And that's where I never knew I couldn't smell till I was 13. And we were going to go, Mother and I were going to go to Kansas, to Great Bend, Kansas, to visit Auntie Weege and the other relatives from the other side of the family that had gone to Kansas, left Wisconsin, and Marie and Albert Gumber. Marie was Auntie Weege's daughter, and I had graduated from 8th grade, and Marie said to me, help me pick out some perfume for a present for a friend of mine. And I was so dumb I didn't realize it was for me, and she took me to the drugstore and gave me all these different bottles of perfume to smell, or cologne, not perfume. There was no smell in between. And prior to that, when I would babysit Lois's kids, Lois loved white shoulder perfume. And I can remember one time I went in her bedroom and I put some on, and I went in the kitchen and she said, you're into my perfume. And I couldn't figure out how she knew. I couldn't smell it.
How did you lose your sense of smell? You didn't tell that part of it.
Yeah, I'm backtracking on that. So I didn't know that I didn't have a sense of smell till I was 13, trying to pick out this gift with Marie Gumber. So then we went back to the fact that every summer Mother and I would go to West Salem. Aunt Sis and Uncle Ed had a small 4-room brick English Tudor house and an empty lot next to them, and you came out this kitchen door and down 4 steps, either to the back of the house or to the front, and the back direction slanted a sidewalk down to the garage. And they had a small metal garbage can, this big. I mean, no bigger than a 5-gallon plastic can of paint, that they had not chicken wire, but something stronger around it to protect it from the raccoons or the animals. And I was so excited. I woke up, as I usually did, around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I got dressed, and I probably didn't eat, and I ran out to get my toys, which were stored inside the garage door. So you came down the sidewalk directly to the garage door, and on the left was this little garbage can. Well, I ran so fast, I tripped over my feet or something, hit the garbage can, and started bleeding like you cannot believe. And
from your nose?
From my nose, and
They can't see your finger on the recording.
That's true. That's true.
You're pointing to your nose.
My tiny nose. I've always had a tiny nose. Dave McFarland always tells me, he'll look at me and he'll say, you've got the tiniest nose I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, my little nose was bleeding. And in those days, you didn't take your kids to the doctor. That cost money. They took me and put me in the bed and let me sleep for 6 hours, bleeding from the nose. I woke up and the bleeding had stopped, and I don't know if I could smell before that, and never, maybe it was a birth defect, but I blame the garbage can. And Mother used to say, when I was 13 and discovered I couldn't smell, Mother would say, well, you know, I just always thought you were a different kind of child. Lois would come in and say, Mom, what are you making? Mother, we never called her Mom. Mother, what did you bake today? Oh, that smells so good. And she'd say, Sandra would wake up and come in the house or whatever, and I'd be baking my heart out, and she'd come in and say, oh, what's that on the table? And she just said, I thought you were a different kind of kid. She never thought that there was something wrong with me.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? That's the things you learn later in life.
Now, in high school, you had activities. You weren't athletic, but you did, well, not that there was many opportunities for girls.
Oh, there were, but I was not athletic.
But you were not athletic. Okay, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. But,
yeah,
but you did stuff like...
I did everything.
You did everything. Okay, you were one of those.
I did everything. You bought your sweater, your school sweater, and you could work for patches, and I did it all. I just, if there was a goal to be met, I met that goal. And I worked in the attendance office, I worked in the gym locker rooms, handing out swimming suits and towels. I worked within the school. Oh, yeah, well, I was first page editor of the school paper. I worked for the local South Chicago Calumet, the Daily Cal, as the high school reporter.
Dale Carnegie?
I joined Dale Carnegie in high school and won a Dale Carnegie scholarship, which led to a Horace Mann scholarship that I got when I graduated from high school. I was president of the National Honor Society. I made National Honor in the first. You had to be 5 semesters of Honor Club before you could get into National Honor, and I made those 5 in a row, and then was in National Honor Society. And one of the greatest things was that my peers voted me in as president, and I was in the drama club, and I didn't sing. I wasn't in the band. I would have loved to. I loved music. That Chicago school system, you had to take 2 years of swimming, and you had to take 2 years of showers in order to graduate. You had to take 2 years of music and 2 years of art. Those were requisites to graduate, whether you were going to go work in the steel mills or sell papers on a corner. And my father lost his mother, and the daughter that she died in childbirth with drowned when she was, I always thought 16, but she might have been 18. And then my father's father drowned in Long Beach, California, when he was building ships out there before my parents were married. Both of those happened within a couple of years of each other. So my father felt that if your children, your loved ones didn't learn how to swim, they couldn't drown because they wouldn't go in the water. He stopped swimming immediately, and he had a boat, and he had a gun, and he shot his muscle out of his arm because the gun fell off the boat seat, and discharge took out his muscle in his, I don't know which arm right now.
It was his left tricep.
Was it his
Pretty
wife?
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what you always told me.
And that he was in the hospital with when his father died in California. And so he couldn't go to his father's funeral, which was very traumatic for him. And so anyway, Lois and I were not allowed to learn how to swim. And we really weren't allowed to hang out at the beach too much and stuff like that, which I did. I rebelled on that. But we were never allowed to go to Munson Beach, which is where Aunt Louise drowned, and didn't go there. But I couldn't swim, but except that you had to learn how to swim. And that's where Dad's oldest sister, Lottie, was my gym teacher. And she she was a younger gym teacher, and, everybody loved her and everything. And so, she was one of the 3 or 4 gym teachers that I had that taught me how to swim. And I digressed, if I don't remember where we went away to that subject. Oh, what I did in high school.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Did you work in high school, or did you not have a job until you were out of high school?
Oh, no. 16, the job of the day was working in a grocery store as a checker. And I worked at the A&P in South Chicago. Now, South Chicago was really the steel mill district. I lived in the steel mill district, but I was on the other side of the river, on the east side, which was a step up from South Chicago where we went to school. And I worked at the A&P, which was a step down from the high-low or the Jewel. And it was a horrible place. Apparently, I never saw any rats, but there were rats in the basement apparently, and had a Simon Legree manager who cracked the whip. If you didn't have somebody to check through your thing, you had to stack boxes or sweep floors. And if somebody came in, carried a bag. Now, we're talking old Polish, old Mexican women who were probably only 60 years old, but they looked like, 95, something like that.
They were wearing black.
Yeah, they wore black, and you'd have to, if they carried a bag in, you'd have to look through their bag. Well, that was demeaning to say to somebody, let me see your bag. Did you shoplift something, And so you had to discreetly try to take their bag and move it onto the thing. And when I was little, my parents had very dear friends. They had all owned land in Chesterton, Indiana. And Aunt Mabel and Uncle Chuck Ling had land in Valparaiso. And it was out in the woods. And that's another story that you may hear sometime. But anyway, that's where the outhouse was. That's where you lifted up the hatch in the kitchen and went down into the basement, the hatch door and everything. And they had geese, and the geese were mean, and the geese would chase you, and the geese would peck at you, and the geese were not nice. But they were pretty, and they were white, and you want to pet them, and you're like this 5-year-old girl, and that's where I learned to drink beer. I used to steal the beer from Dad and Uncle Charlie. They'd put it on the log they'd sit on, and I'd sneak up behind them, and they'd laugh when I steal their beer. But I had to grab this bag one day at the A&P. And I'm leaning across to this little old, I think she was his Mexican lady, to take her bag, and a live goose stuck his head out at me. Well, I screamed so loud. Joe was the guy's first name, the manager, the blankety-blank guy. He came running. He said, "What's the matter with me?" I said, "There's a ghost there!" And he said, "What?" I said, "There's back there, you." Well, that was funny. There were other times when the old women would come in and they'd have all their money in little brown paper candy bags. and they'd have it down in their brassieres, and they'd have to dig. I remember the one time there was this younger woman. She was probably 21, and it was her mother, and she had come to the store with her mother, and it was time to pay for the money for the groceries, and her mother dug in and pulled out her crumpled up brown penny candy bag and doled out her money. But it was quite a learning experience. Yes, I worked there, and every Friday night I went to every football game, and you also were, that's where Dad and I got our love for classical music, was in high school. The 2 years you had to either be in chorus, band, or take music appreciation. And part of that at Bowen, where I went to school, you could sign up for a very cheap amount of money, and you could get out of school legally and go downtown on the IC and go to Orchestra Hall, and you sat up in the farthest reaches of the balcony, and you listened to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, all the most beautiful music you ever wanted to see. And when Dad and I met and started to get serious, and I mean all the wonderful music of our times, Johnny Mathis, Frank Sinatra, all that, and jazz and everything, we found out that we both liked classical. And it was like, what do you mean you like classical? You know, it was so wonderful. But high school for me was very good. I had a good group of girlfriends. We never saw each other out of high school, only in school. And we took the bus, the public bus. We could walk from our homes to the bus stop, and I would ride 20 minutes to Bowen, get out and walk another half block. I would walk block to the bus stop and then a half block back. And they were good days, and a lot of those friends are still dear friends over the years.
Now, how did you guys meet? I didn't let him tell the story because he was bound to mess it up.
Never. I was very big in junior achievement. I had gone to many conferences and conventions, locally, district-wise, and nationally, and met a lot of people from all over Chicago through junior achievement. And many of these people went to Navy Pier. My dad would not allow me to go to Navy Pier because I'd have to walk through the Rush Street area from the bus or the subway to the school to Navy Pier, and he thought that was too dangerous. And so I could go to the black neighborhood and go to the Wilson Junior College. That was okay, but I couldn't go to Navy Pier. And so anyway, a lot of my friends did go there from junior achievement and from high school. And well, we never got into all the Bobs. All my boyfriends' names were Bobs. I had many boyfriends, and from the time I was 15 on till I met your dad at 19, and there was still a Bob in the picture then. And we I knew that in gym class at Bowen, when Miss Pat, Auntie Lottie's was Miss Pat, when Miss Pat's brother came back from the Navy, everybody knew Miss Pat's brother came back from the Navy. Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's good. You know, all this, that, and the other thing. And then I had friends that went off to Navy Pier, and from JA, Junior Achievement, that went to Navy Pier, and my friends were hanging out with the vets. And, of course, Dad was a vet. And so on my going into my 19th birthday, for Christmas, I was going to have a picture taken as a photography studio because this is what you did, as that was a big deal to give to your parents. And I had a picture taken in a drape, with everything in my hair done right, and got on the bus in South Chicago to come home and ran into one of my good friends from Bowen and the pier, and she said, there's a party tonight at Sharon's. Okay, fine. So it happened to be a Saturday night. Now, I was dating Bob Strusenberg at that point on Friday nights, and this was Saturday night, and it was just before school was returning to session in September. It was the middle of September then, and I was free. And Barb said, come on to the party, and she said, it's a going back to school party. So that was fine. And I went to the party, and my friend Carol Girac was there from the north side, from JA, and I knew that she knew Pat, Miss Pat's brother, and she liked him, and he was a good dancer, and she was a good dancer, and I was an adequate dancer. I had gone with Bob Lewis, who was a very good dancer. Oh, God, was he good, and he taught me a lot. And, but I still wasn't Carol Girac, and I knew she liked him, so I was, fine. So I went there, and I did not want, in any way, shape, or form, to get hooked up with a jock. Now, the little brother of a gym teacher is not my idea of fun and games. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And then he was at the party. And
not that it makes any difference, but I don't think Carol Girac was at the party.
No, but that's right. But I knew she liked it.
Well,
that was
that's
it.
a whole
Yes.
different story there.
That was right.
She lived way on the north side.
But she was my friend, and I was honoring her claim on you. So anyway, you came to the party, and I came to the party, and now you can pick up whether you noticed me or not.
Well, of course I noticed you. How could I have not noticed you?
Why? Because I was this little girl with blonde curly hair.
No, you were clearly the most attractive girl at the party.
So the Chung Devil always.
Yeah, that's me.
And so I needed a ride home that night, and
you knew how to drive by then?
At that point.
But he didn't have a car that night. Oh. And
I had the Plymouth.
You didn't drive that night, dear. It was either Raybox or Jim or somebody had the car, and you said, would you like a ride home? So-and-so's got the car.
I thought it was my car, but anyway, I guess that's immaterial.
Drove me home. Well, the thing was that we danced, and I said, I don't want to know this guy. I don't like this guy. He's a jock. I don't want this, And he said, let's go take a walk. And we walked around the block, and when you're dating somebody, do you remember back to those days? You'd be alone, and there'd be either an uncomfortable silence or a comfortable silence. Well, we had this walk around the block, and it was the most comfortable silence you could ever want, and that was very nice. And so he got a ride for me to get home, and he said, I'd like to call you. And I said, oh, okay, now you know your father. You know his memory. It wasn't any better back then. What are you grinning about? And so he said, what's your phone number? And I said, I'll go in the house and I'll get a piece of paper to write it on.
Region 41061.
he still to this day knows that phone number. And I just never expected to hear from him again. And that was in September, and we started dating. And I dated Bob Stusenberg on Friday nights, who was also a vet, and you on Saturday nights till after Christmas. I got a birthday and Christmas present out of both of you. And had some nice times with Bob. We had nice beach parties at the dunes at night with all the older people, and older 18, 19, 23-year-olds, with building the bonfires on the beach and having beer and reacquainting your taste buds to what beer tasted like. It was very interesting. And we dated for a while, and it was very nice. And then one day we got talking, and he said, "What's your birthday?" I said, "November 1st. I said, "When's your birthday?" He said, "July 27th, and I knew I was going to marry him.
Okay.
Excuse me?
Why did that?
When was your grandfather's birthday?
Oh, the same birthday as your father's, right? Okay.
And I knew I could live with somebody that was that sign,
Zodiac sign.
that disposition, whatever. And I started laughing, and he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Oh, nothing." I said, "Little do you know, you're going to marry me, fella, and we have nothing to do with this. It's just in the stars." And we just had all these things that were, like I said, the older parents, the 11 years between my parents, 13 between his sisters, 14 years older, depression kids, being alone, growing up lonely.
So then you got engaged, and were you engaged long?
14 months.
Okay. Well, you finished up school for...
No, he didn't finish up.
Well, you finished up school?
No,
What was the delay?
Well, making sure we could tolerate each other. And I wanted him. A lot longer. He lied. He put up a false front. He made me think that he wasn't into sports. And I thought I was being so honest, and I let him see every bad disposition and good disposition and everything. And until we got married, I didn't know that he was interested in playing baseball, golf, watching football, which ran into basketball, which ran into golf, which ran into, and that was dirty on his part. But that was, the way that happens.
Called courting.
Yeah, right. Don't tell her. And so he wouldn't get married until he was going back to school. Instead of getting married at the beginning of the summer, we got married September 5th, and school started the 15th, something like that. School always started late then, and finals were in January after Christmas break.
September 5th, 1959.
Yeah.
And it was a very windy day. I've seen the pictures.
Yeah, man, you haven't even seen the movies of it.
I swear I have, but I don't know how I would have, but I know that it was windy, and I have images of moving veils and dresses blowing, but I don't know how I could have ever seen that movie, but I've seen still pictures of stuff blowing.
It was a hot Labor Day weekend, and it was
blowing like crazy.
It was a lovely wedding, and we had 5 attendants, and Betty was our junior bridesmaid. Lois was my maid of honor.
The wedding was almost canceled because your father was in the hospital.
A month before, we were going to go home and write the wedding invitations, the envelopes, and Dad was sick. And we said, okay, it doesn't have to be 4 weeks on the dot. It could be 1 day short. We'll do it tomorrow night. And I went to work the next day, and we didn't write the invitations that night. And I got called home from work, and I went on the bus, of course, because Dad didn't allow any of us to drive. One driver in the house was enough. and a friend that I worked with drove me home, and Dad always said, don't take me to the hospital. I'm going to die. I'm die at home. I walked in the front door, and this Jean, who was much older, she was probably 40, insisted on coming in with me, and I walked in the door, and Dad said, take me to the South Chicago Hospital. And he had a ruptured appendix, and my mother's mother died of a ruptured appendix. And so my mother went all to pieces, not knowing what to do, that Dad was going to die. And so we didn't know whether he was going to make it. All I wanted was, I did not want to change our wedding date, and I did not want anything other than Dad to walk me down the aisle. And so we changed our reception, and we had to change the caterers, we had to change did we change the band? Maybe not. Maybe the band made it. I think they did. But that was not easy. And then I didn't have a job, and he wouldn't let me live with him until I got a job. So I had to go back home and live with my folks, and I was the talk of the neighborhood, because they've only been married for a week, and she's back home, and so it was fun and games. But I finally got a job, and we moved to Champaign-Urbana with our trailer, our 8 by 40 foot, 35 foot trailer.
That's at the railroad tracks.
Yeah, where the mice came in on the pipes in the winter, and every finals in January, your poor father
had to crawl under the trailer and thaw out the sewer pipe.
With the torch.
With a heat gun or something there.
We'd have
pouring hot water down it.
Yeah.
That's what we did. Pour the boiling water down it.
For 3 years, every January, he had to thaw that out and have this big frozen.
Didn't have heat tapes then.
Yeah.
Not that we could have afforded them if they had them, but.
So you were going to school full-time? Mom was working full-time? This is when you were working for the meat buyer, wasn't that?
For a Jewel Tea Company division, which was Eisner Food Stores, and I worked for the meat buyer.
And getting the GI Bill.
And you were getting the GI Bill.
So you weren't working part-time or anything, you were just a full-time student?
Full-time student.
And you did that for 3 years?
When you were single, you got $98 on the GI Bill, married $115, and one or more kids, you got $135 to live on.
Wow.
And so
the GI Bill lasted until my senior year, and then I ran out. And so at that point, I got a part-time assistantship.
Dr. Cook.
With Dr. Ralph Cook.
And the ceramic engineering department.
And then you stayed and did your master's in 1 year?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember I probably worked 20 hours a week, something like that.
But it was the recession, and so you decided rather than take a poor-paying job, you'd stay the year. So he graduated in June of 61, and he went summer 61, the full 2 semesters the next year, and in July we left, and he had finished his master's in 62, and he got the job out here. Yeah. But the job that you worked
with United Aircraft?
Yeah, it was United Aircraft Research Laboratories then.
Okay. And you were already pregnant with Lori?
Yeah.
When you moved out here?
We moved here in August, and she was born December 12th.
Okay. And then,
That's right. We had to ship the car because the doctor did not want her to take that long a car ride.
the train ride was okay?
No, we flew.
Oh, you flew. Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
we flew out here, but Harry had been called back to the Berlin crises, and they were stationed in
Virginia.
Fort Fort Lee, Virginia, somewhere down in
I want to say
Virginia.
Fort Leonard Wood, but that's not
No, that's
Virginia.
Missouri. Fort Lee's New Jersey, somewhere in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia area. And so I wanted to go see my sister and Betty, because Harry Robert was already now at the University of Illinois, as was Lenny. And so we seen him. He had every Sunday dinner with us. But I hadn't seen Betty or Billy or Lois or Harry, so I wanted to go down there before he started work. So the doctor said you can either drive out there or drive to Connecticut and not go to Virginia, or you can go to Virginia and fly out there. So we had the car shipped on the train, and they had no idea. They knew who Pratt Whitney was, but they didn't know who United Aircraft was. We had to pay for that shipping out of the money we were going to get established with here, and we never got that money back for months. And then they took taxes out of it. Remember? How could you forget? Oh, I pay the bills, I remember.
So you get to Connecticut, you work for United Aircraft, Lori's born. I'm born a few years later, in 66, 4 years later, basically.
Later than we wanted.
Later than we wanted. And, let's see, and then when did you start going back for your PhD? Was I already born when you started taking?
Oh, no.
Or did you whittle away at that the whole time?
Yeah, no, after working at UTC for a year, several of the people that I work with signed up for classes up at UConn. And I thought, well, why not? You know, I guess I was in a chemistry program at the time. And the company, the courses we were taking was offered 1 day a week, 3 hours class, and the company would allow you time off with pay to go to the class. So the classes were usually like 3 to 6. So we would leave the research center 2 o'clock and
Carpool out.
You know, carpool out. And did that for a while.
Don't you remember, Steve, my cry? Your father went to school 13 of the first 14 years we were married.
I do remember.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
3 years when we got married. 1 year he took off when we moved here, and I had Lori, and that was not a normal year. Then he went back to school for 10 years to get his PhD. So
From 63 to 73. You got your PhD in 73. I remember that.
Yeah.
And it was basically for a while. It was just a one course, and then I was able to, on occasions, to take a couple courses a semester. One up at UConn and one locally, and then I finally got serious. And they had a chemical engineering program, and I decided that was the way to probably go. That was more in keeping than chemistry. And about the time that I had most of my courses done, and I was ready to start really moving into taking my prelims, working on my thesis, UConn opened the Institute of Material Sciences, and they opened up a metallurgy curriculum, and they brought in several people to teach the curriculum. One of the fellows that they brought in was a fellow who had recently graduated from MIT, a fellow by the name of Theodolos Katamas. He was a Greek Cypriot, and he agreed to take me on as a graduate student. And so once I passed my prelims and found the thesis subject, and Theo agreed to be my thesis advisor, UTC then gave me 1 year leave of absence at half salary.
But up until then, every time I turned around, I said, okay, you got all your courses taken? He'd say, yes, but they're offering this class, and I never know if I'll ever have a chance to take this again. You pulled that on me for about 3 years, I swear. You could have been done sooner. But anyway,
I went through and worked on my thesis for the year, and it took longer than a year.
Okay, Dad came here in 1962.
September.
And he was earning $699 a month, $8,400 a year. Okay, 7 times 12, $8,400 a year. And John Phillips had his master's and went to IBM, and he was making $5,500 a year. That was the wages for graduate degrees in those days. And in 73, you were making $14,000, and we lived on $7,000 a year while Dad was going to school, and we had the 2 of you kids. Okay.
$7,000 and a MasterCard.
Yeah. No, we didn't. MasterCards, they didn't have credit cards those days. No. Well, but we bought a lot of meat by the side of beef and had it in the locker at Elsie Wood.
I remember going in that locker. Yeah.
That was, when you watched CSI with them pulling out the...
I just remember the big oaken door and that it would be cold in there in the middle of winter. I mean, the middle of summer. It would be cold. Well, all right.
But he finished his PhD in May of...
73.
And when he defended his thesis, I didn't want to be in there as one of the people. I stood outside in the hall and paced for an hour because I was afraid that my mother hen, I had to take on so many responsibilities that I really became a mother hen. And I was afraid I would attack any of the professors that didn't talk nice to them.
It was very interesting because I did invite my boss there, Earl Thompson, Southern gentleman. And after it was over, he said that he thought that I had done an excellent job. And I took that as a very high compliment because Earl was a gentleman, technically very good, and for someone of his stature to give me that kind of a compliment, I felt very elated to hear that.
And he wasn't going to he wasn't going to go through the ceremony. And I said, no way. I never complained about those 10 years that he did his PhD until one point when he was pulling this one more class, and he wasn't deciding on a thesis subject. And I said, that's it. Stop. Drop it. Don't do it. And it was like, you're serious? And I said, yeah. Just put up with enough. This is it. So then he said, okay. So then it came. He finished it up. Everything was fine. He worked so hard. Played a lot, too, though. Never took us for ice cream cones, but he got ice cream cones at the...
I remember the chocolate milk machines at UConn. I have distinct memories of the little cartons of chocolate milk coming out of the machines. Whatever bribe to keep me sitting still while you had to go check on something there.
But he said, no, I'm not going to go through the program, because he did go through graduation for his bachelor's, but not his master's. So PhD came on. I said, absolutely not. Your children have done without you for so many hours of classes. They have suffered, and I have put up a lot. I said,
I remember the party. I remember making the sign for the front of the house. I remember making the T-shirts that we gave you. They said PhD Power and Dr. Val or something like that. But, yeah, I have distinct memories of that, even though I was probably only 6 or 7.
You were young.
I was born in 66, and you got it in 73, so I would have been 6.
Six and a half, yeah.
So, anyway.
So that was the beginning of our lifetime together, which has been very, very good. He used to say, Lottie and Ronnie used to say, now how long have you been married? And we'd say, 5 years. And they said, really? I said, yes. And he said, it seems like yesterday. And I used to go, oh, you put me through. But you were wonderful, as you did.
I'm modest. All right, we'll end on that.
And then